For January, we have a speaker. She's actually a former student of mine and a colleague. She's a massage therapist in New York City, and she's going to be talking to us about healing trauma, mind, body, spirit. And the topic is truly about a gentleman by the name, his last name is Gabor, I think. It's about compassionate inquiry. And they're actually teaching compassionate inquiry in medical schools, which is quite shocking, but it's about time. Sorry, rewind. Okay. That's for January. And in February, we have a physical therapist who's going to be talking to us. Her name is Maureen Mccloskey, and she's actually in Rye in Westchester County. And she's going to be talking to us about myofascial release, which, our issues are in our tissues. Our muscles have memory, and our psychology is our biology. So myofascial release can help to release what we're holding on to, and it's a good therapy. So that's for January and February, and heaven knows what's going to come around the corner. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. And I did hit the record button, right? Yes, I did. Okay. And I'm gonna, I know these three speakers, and there's some things I didn't know about, and I'm gonna get to that. That's about Colin, something I didn't know about Colin. But Jenni Stone has been writing about astrology for about 30 years, although she looks about 29 right now. All right, 39, very good. And she's had articles published in numerous magazines, and she's a regular guest on Shine On Radio on 100.7 WHUD. And she's been a member and with us for many, many years. She's also written a couple of books, and she's going to be one of our speakers tonight. And Colin McPhillamy. Yes, I know. He's an astrologer, he's an actor, and he's got that accent that all women love, right, Colin? Just, you're like a magnet with that voice of yours. What I didn't know is that you studied Chinese language in Peking. Yes, and that's like, wow, I'm really impressed. Now, Pam is our co-coordinator of Westchester Holistic Network. She's a Reiki master, and she's owned and operated a business in the past, and she does a lot of astrology readings, right? Along with being a Reiki master and moving to Mexico, and now is an expat. Is that what they call you now?
I prefer to think of myself as a migrant.
Oh, I like that. So without further ado, I think Jenni's going to start us off. Jenni, would you like to start us off? You're each going to have about 10 minutes. And then I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you. And if I run out of questions, then anyone else can ask. And I have a question that Beverly has inquired about. So I'm going to mute myself. Jenni, if you would begin.
Sure. Let's start with the winter solstice, which was today, which happens to be a very big turning point. First of all, we have Jupiter moving into Pisces, where, let's call him, is very comfortable in Pisces. He likes Pisces. But the solstice is extra powerful because it comes almost on a full moon. So we're already at the furthest point away that we ever get from the sun in the Northern Hemisphere. And we get the moon pulling us even further. So this combination makes it a very powerful turning point. Then we also had Venus go retrograde. And in January, we've got Mercury going retrograde. I don't know if you could feel the Venus retrograde. I certainly felt it. But I've got a Taurus rising, so, you know, Venus is my ruling planet. But with the retrogrades, we're going to be looking backwards, not in reality, like in your rear view mirror, but looking back, especially at relationships, especially at your relationship with money and how it creates an anxiety. But it's only money. It's only money. And money looks as if it rules the world, but it really doesn't. And that's the whole point of the revolution that's going on right now. Does money rule the world? But does the plutocracy rule the world? Does the top-down authority rule the world? Or are we coming to a revolution where people and compassion and wanting to change, is that what rules the world? That's the big question going into 2022. Who rules the world? Now, let me present some good news. And it's on the front of the climate change. We are getting so many difficult weather issues at this moment that the insurance companies are running out of money. Wow, the insurance companies are going to be on the side of climate change. Is that good news or what? Yes, the plutocracy is going to have to get involved in climate change because they're running out of money to fix things. Oh my goodness, that's a big deal. Okay. So we've got Mercury retrograde, we've got Venus retrograde, and that's both in January. So hold your breath for January. But coming out of it in February, we've got the Mars-Venus conjunction, and that's February 9-10, and close to Pluto. And that leaves us with the desire and the confidence to move personal goals forwards. So please be present when that happens in February. Go after your dreams. You have more than a month to prepare and leave behind any stagnation or inertia that's been caused by all the lockdowns. So we've got a month. And then we've got, that could mean, especially with relationships, any angst, any trauma that's happened, release it. Do your best to release it in January so that we can move forward. Send yourself some flowers because this is going to happen. The release is going to come around Valentine's Day. So it's time to send yourself flowers, congratulate yourself that you got through this. And we're into March and April, which is much more of a celebration than it has been in 2021. And that continues somewhat through 2022, especially May, June, July. because we've got Jupiter going into Aries. And it's time to start again. Get everything moving. There's a bit of backtracking in August, September, but the real new beginning, and I looked into this, the real new beginning is 2023. Meanwhile, we're still in the middle of a revolution. We're still in the middle of a shakeup in the USA. And perhaps that extends into the world. But the question to me in this revolution is, who's in charge? Is it regular people? Is it going to be money? Is it going to be plutocracy? Is it going to be top down? Or are we ready to start something new? That's the big question. And I see 2022 as being hopeful, but not necessarily the revolution. However, 2023 is when Pluto finally moves into Aquarius. And on the one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, there's usually something that happens right before that change. And who knows what it's going to be. Last time when Pluto went into Capricorn, we had a financial meltdown. That was when the housing market fell apart. So Pluto's always, we never know with Pluto what he's going to come up with. But there's probably going to be something that makes us stop and take a look. But the future looks good. 2022 looks very hopeful. 2023 is when the real change comes. Thank you.
It looks like Colin is up.
Good.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. Can you all hear me? Yep, you're nodding. That's good. So I'm going to share the screen. Am I? Here it is. Let's see. Yep, can you see that? Okay, some astrology on crypto and Bitcoin. And this, I think, builds nicely onto what Jenny was saying about the plutocracy. Before I start, I'd been doing some work on the astrology of Shakespeare. And after a while, it dawned on me that the outer planets during the 1590s, which was the decade of his greatest productivity, were all in fire signs, even though they were unknown generally to the, they hadn't been discovered. So I became interested in outer planets by element. So I want to have a look at a bit of that. So we're looking at something financial here, and it's very important to say this, okay? I hope that goes without saying. At the very end, I'm going to just give you some resources if you're interested in talking to people who do give advice. I'm certainly not one of them, okay? I'd just like to make that clear. Crypto. So this is just a very quick whistle-stop tour through some features which I think are interesting. And mostly, Bitcoin came on the scene in 2009, and now there are something like 11,000 cryptocurrencies, most of which will disappear without trace, I'm fairly certain. But in the meantime, people are having fun. Some people are making money, some people are losing. It's easy to do both without really knowing what's going on. This is the Bitcoin chart. And we'll come back to this in a moment, but just take a look at the shape of it. And you can see that there's a Western Hemisphere emphasis, and there's a 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th house emphasis. And there's a Uranus-Saturn opposition, okay? So we'll talk about that in a moment. I'd just like to say this, when it comes to financial advice, and particularly the movement of the markets, all the pundits do one of three things. They say, yes, the market will go up, That's number one. Or they say, no, the market will go down. That's number two. Or they say, it looks like it's going to trend sideways. And so as long as you say one of those things, you're probably onto something. No one knows anything is this wonderful phrase coined by William Goldman, who wrote Adventures in the Screen Trade. He's talking about Hollywood and film producers, because if anyone did know anything, there would be a string of undiluted hits, one after another. But of course, it doesn't work like that. And maybe that's a good thing. Here we've got the chart. Yes, before I go there, let me just say, what I wanted to do was take a look at the mid-70s, and I'll tell you why. It's because in right about 1976, even though the financial instrument of the mortgage-backed security had been invented in the late 60s, it really began to get massive adoption in the mid-1970s. And I think it's fair to say that this was the foundation of the financial collapse in 2008. So here's the USA chart in the middle, and this is the chart February 15th, 1976. On January 29th, 1976, Neptune crosses the USA ascendant, and it crosses it another 4 times over the next year and a half or so. And at this point, well, in 1886-7 through 1894, Pluto and Neptune were conjunct in Gemini. That's a conjunction that happens every 500 years. And in some ways, it's possible to say that that conjunction sounds a sort of cultural bass note for the next 500 years of development. And those planets were conjoined in Gemini. They then separated. And in about 1912, they began to travel in sextile. And they've been traveling in sextile. There they are, 2 signs apart. And that will go on to the late 2030s. So I'd just like to point out that Pluto is in air, in Libra, Neptune is in fire here, and Uranus is in water. So the big 3 are in this 4th quadrant of the chart. So we're talking about something generational and transpersonal. Large-scale adoption of mortgage-backed securities at that time. Right now, of course, Uranus is in Taurus, as I think Jenni may have mentioned, and this is shaking up the financial system. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus is a planet of money. Taurus is about comfort, security, solidity, tradition. Uranus is about the unexpected, the maverick, the unpredictable, the unforeseeable. Let's go back. The Ides of March, 1976, I'm just pointing this out. Here's a grand trine in water, and it's aspecting the USA Venus. Venus in the USA is conjoined Jupiter. USA has always been very keen on money. We can't dispute that, and very successful in money. There's both more and less money in the USA than anywhere in the world. And by transit, we have the midpoint of Venus-Mercury is trine Uranus transiting in Scorpio. We've still got this sextile going on, Pluto-Neptune. And at the same time, Neptune is quincunx the south node in Taurus in the 6th house of daily routine. And of course, Taurus is ruled by Venus. So we've got an emotional grand trine, a water grand trine in the air houses. I think that indicates thinking with your feelings, which isn't always such a good idea. Okay, let's move on. This is the Pluto ingress that Jenni mentioned in 2008. And this is the East Coast USA, New York, the financial center. Take a look at this. It's on the IC. So this conjunction of Pluto, planet of transformation, disruption, death and rebirth, survival, reinvention, is conjoined the planet of money and the planet of expansion, all in Capricorn to do with big business, in the foundational point of the chart. And there's an opposition to Mars. Shortly after this, of course, Pluto goes retrograde, goes back into Sagittarius. So there we have the fire and air thing going on again. And if you haven't seen it, if you're interested in this subject, a film I highly recommend is The Big Short. It is available on Netflix or Amazon, I can't remember which one. But it really goes into some detail about the utter corruption and failure of the financial system and why the crash happened. And we were talking earlier about feminine energy. I'm afraid it's just a film really about lots of angry men, except for Brad Pitt, who plays the sane one, kind of saves the world. So that's good. Outer planets conjunct the angles. Yes, there we are. Neptune on the ascendant, Pluto on the IC. And similarly in the UK chart, well, another financial center, of course, and that same conjunction hitting the IC in the UK. So a foundational shakeup in 2008. When the crash actually happened in September of that year, that opposition had become a sextile. And again, the elements involved are air, Libra, and fire, Sagittarius. So here's Bitcoin coming along the following year. I think this chart is absolutely fascinating. Okay, the only planet in the Eastern hemisphere is Saturn, and it's in Virgo, and it's in the second house of resources. So one could expect Saturn in Virgo to be meticulous, detailed, organized. I think there are three signatures here that this is something for the population. First of all, we have the nodal axis, south node, north node, on the ascendant descendant. So perhaps there's a destiny of taking this to the people. But let's notice where Pluto is. Pluto's in the fifth house of gambling. And it's conjoined Mars, planet of energy and desire and action. But of course, one of the attributes of Pluto is invisibility. Nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Nobody knows. Not likely to either. If I was him, I wouldn't tell anyone. And if we take a look at the house emphasis, 5th through 8th, these are the social houses. This is all about people. By element, we have lots of earth, and we have lots of air straddling the 6th, the descendant, and the 7th house of contractual arrangement. We also have Neptune conjunct Venus, planet of money. So there's a lot of illusion, mythology, dream, expansion, imagination surrounding this money thing. And Neptune and Uranus are in mutual reception. In other words, they're in the sign that the other one rules. So the mystic meets the maverick in a big way in this chart. So how are we doing for time? Let's go on. Yeah. Okay, so I just thought we'd take a quick look at this. How does the USA see Bitcoin? And I think this is fundamental to the future of crypto because China has said no for the time being. But there are governments worldwide who are on the verge of or considering seriously issuing their own digital currencies. And the USA is beginning to struggle with how to regulate what is basically a knees up at the moment. It's completely the Wild West out there. Nobody really knows who's behind anything or what's going on. But the technology, I think, is here to stay. So how does the USA see Bitcoin? Well, I think it's interesting that if you put the Bitcoin chart outside the USA, most of the Bitcoin planets are in the first quadrant of sort of personal identity, and they're opposing the third quadrant of the collective. So the other thing to say is that, as we know, back in 2020, today, a year ago, we had this hopeful conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, beginning a new 200-year cycle of the social planets Jupiter and Saturn conjoining every 20 years in an air element. And as we know, we had a preview of that in 1980 when they conjoined in Libra. And that arguably was the very beginnings of the digital age. But now they will meet every 20 years in air for the next 200 years. And I think the indication there is unimaginable advances in technology, among other things. And I think that, cryptocurrency is one of those things. So where are we now? This is the Bitcoin chart here, which we very briefly touched on. And this is, these are the transits today. And what's coming up? We talked about this. Here's a transit. So Neptune and Uranus in the Bitcoin chart are in relationship, in mutual reception. But adding to that, Neptune by transit is sitting on the natal Uranus and therefore also opposing the Saturn. So not only do we have at the moment the Uranus-Saturn square going on in the sort of in everybody's chart in the whole world, the struggle between freedom and authority, which we see being played out, on more or less every level of life, from should I get vaccinated to what is my government, going to do about, if Bill Gates wants to know where I am, all he has to do is make a phone call, or not even, okay. Saturn is on the North Node. This may be putting the brakes on the destiny. Cryptocurrencies are immensely volatile. When the market is going up, the sort of copycat crypto coins tend to break loose and they swing wildly. When the market is going down, which it has been in the last week or so, then everything follows Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was pioneering this technology. There are other cryptocurrencies. Ethereum is the sort of next main one, which has slightly superior technology to Bitcoin. And the technology is being improved. And I think it's very hopeful. I mean, one of the things we hear about is the environmental impact of the enormous amount of energy it takes to mine crypto. That is changing, and it must change. Of course it must, otherwise it won't survive. The big conjunction that's coming up, and how will this affect Bitcoin specifically, is this. Venus, the retrograde that Jenni mentioned, is going to conjoin Pluto on Christmas Day. So that'll be very interesting. I wouldn't dare predict. There are other people who are doing that very well, and I'm not one of them, as I said before. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay. So Pluto enters Aquarius in 2023, but then it dances back into Capricorn and goes backwards and forwards for a while, finally entering 0 degrees Aquarius in 2024, and starts its then 19-year journey through this part of the Bitcoin chart, going through Aquarius. I think it's fair to say that it would be very surprising if we didn't see, the effect. The word must be transformation. What form that will take, is very hard to say, because the great thing with prediction, as we all know, is that it's completely accurate in hindsight. So I like it that last year was 2020, which isn't that right? 2020 vision. We can all see why, what happened when, looking back, not so easy looking forward. And then after Pluto establishes itself in Aquarius, Neptune will enter Aries. And we have a repeat of that relationship of these two massive outer planets. Neptune and Pluto will be traveling in sextile in these elements, in fire and air. Of course, that speaks to me of combustion. If you're interested, Shakespeare got there first, as usual. Sonnets 44 and 45 tell you everything you need to know about the elements. And I think it's worth mentioning that Pluto will cross the Bitcoin descendant 3 times between 26 and 29. So, I mean, Bitcoin came on the scene in 2009, and for the best part of 10 years, it floated along. A Bitcoin could be had for sort of 10 cents, and then it was $1, and then maybe it was $100. The pandemic really kicked it into something extraordinary. There was this explosion of interest, of trading, of speculation, and as you probably know, it went up to $50,000, $57,000 or so. There's all sorts of theory about stock market movements, and one of the great theorists was Elliot, who gave his name to the Elliot waves. I can't remember his first name just at the moment, but he said that waves of stock market advance go in series of 5 and waves of decline go in series of 3. Most of the time it looks completely random, but there are times where you can very clearly see such a pattern. And when you can, the other thing that comes into play is the Fibonacci numbers, which we find throughout nature in the shape of a galaxy, in the shape of an unborn child, in architecture, in music, in plants, and so on. So and in the relationship between the orbital period of the Earth and the orbital period of the planet Venus. So Fibonacci numbers are about relationship. And if you look at the chart of the movement of Bitcoin since its inception, you can very clearly see these patterns if you take a long enough time view of a year at least. So I won't predict what's going to happen. I will disclose I do have a little bit of Bitcoin, not very much, but some, because I think it's a fun ride. Never, of course, invest more than you can afford to lose. That much I will say, with no fear of litigation. But here are some people who do stick their necks out, and they're all interesting in different ways. Michael Lutin and Christine Skinner are both established astrologers in their middle age and probably well known. I don't know if you've come across Maureen Altman. She is an astonishing person. She has a stellium in Leo in the 8th. And if you find her on Twitter or on YouTube, you'll see that makes perfect sense. She's very fiery and demonstrative. She's highly opinionated, not at all afraid to say what she thinks. And she predicts the movement of these cryptocurrencies, sometimes, and I hasten to say not always, but sometimes, and I'd say more than half the time, with considerable accuracy. And I think that's tremendously interesting. So there it is. I mean, that's not really a prediction about what's going to happen, but it is examination of some interesting ideas. And I'm particularly interested, as I began, in what the elemental position is of the outer planets and how they affect us generationally. So there are some thoughts. Thank you. I'll stop the share.
Thank you, Colin. Ooh. Well, Pam, you're up.
I am. And Colin, I'm going to have to listen to that again, and I'm glad it's all being recorded. So I think you could have stretched that out to an hour and a half presentation on its own. That was pretty dense, but thank you so much.
It's pretty dense. Yeah.
What a tremendous amount of work, and greatly appreciated. And I love that you've got a little bitty bit of Bitcoin.
Just a little bit, not much. I hope to make a fortune.
Well, I hope you do too.
Well, thank you. And if I lose it, that's too bad.
That's a really tremendous attitude. So I'm going to, I've listened to my colleagues, and I'm going to present some timing things that we're going through as we go through 2022. And one of the things that's shifting, as has been mentioned, is that Jupiter will finally move out of Aquarius and go back into Pisces. It dipped its toe in briefly earlier this year, but pretty much during the whole pandemic blow up, Jupiter, the sign of expansion and also called the Great Benefic, has been in Saturn signs. So what that means is it started out in Capricorn and now it's in Aquarius, and both those signs traditionally are in the camp of the planet Saturn. Saturn, as has been mentioned, is also in the sign of Aquarius. So what this gives is it gives the two heads of Janus, one that looks forward and one that looks backwards, a very Saturnine influence, which means everything's about constriction, limits, fear. Now, these are not bad things because we need structure in order to, we need skeletons to stand, we need structure to have homes in which we live, we need financial systems, which right now, to the point of my colleagues, is shifting and changing as we're on the foundation of this air cycle, and digital currency, not having money is, it was interesting when I researched this. The last time we were in an air cycle, Marco Polo introduced paper money to Italy, which seemed like such a crazy concept to them. What, the Chinese use pieces of paper to represent gold? Well, now we're here. Now we're using virtual currency all the time. So as we shift into Jupiter in Pisces, which will be back in December 29th, we move into energy that may buoy up and seem more optimistic because, as Jenni mentioned, Jupiter is at home in the sign of Pisces, god of the sea, where all this energy of water. Water is actually, there's a quote in The Economist: the data is the most valuable thing to exchange nowadays. I think it's water. I mean, if we don't have water, who cares about data? But anyway, with Jupiter in Pisces, optimism should start to return, especially as we get to the spring. Right now, Venus is retrograde, as has been mentioned, and actually the first time it met with Pluto was December 11th. And yes, again on Christmas Day. And finally, with the retrograde cycle, she'll pass the god of death and transformation one last time in early March. So what does this mean? Well, back to Jenni's point about money, Venus is the goddess of beauty. She's also about what we value. What do you care most about? Stuff has gone through a big transition with the pandemic. People, yes, we love fashion, but do we need as much? Everything is shifting with what we value and care about. Venus also, as she's retrograde, is transforming into the morning star. So that means that beautiful Venus that's been in the sky for months is in daylight, so we don't see her anymore. And when Venus is the morning star, she is a lot more aggressive and assertive. So we go into 2022 with Venus retrograde in the sign of Capricorn, where she'll be for months. And she is basically brokering with a god of death and transformation. So yes, are we ready to change? Are we truly ready to transform and change? Are we ready to work as a world economy and share intellectual property so that we can innovate and transmute in unprecedented ways, which is hard to do when companies hold on to "this is mine" instead of sharing intelligence? We'll see. So the other thing that's intriguing to me is that the Olympics are taking place during the Venus retrograde and as Jupiter is going into Pisces. And it's as though Jupiter expands whatever it's near. So yes, it's abundant, but that's why when it was in Saturn ruled signs for the past couple of years, it's been expanding that sort of punitive, let's hold ourselves close and let's protect, and not necessarily bad things, but also a lot of strategic, how do we generate money? How do we keep people employed? Do people want to be employed in the same way they were. And jury's out, everything's changing, really, about what we care about, what we value. So with the Olympics happening, it's intriguing because years ago when, oh gosh, we were looking at 2008, we were looking at the end of the Mayan calendar, and there was a lot of thought about the shift of the financial center moving east. So the Olympics, of course, are taking place in China, where most of the people who are vaccinated with vaccines that are not as protective against the variant. So this is going to be a very kind of a pressure cooker Olympics, where of course the Olympians want to be able to compete, and the powers that be are posturing themselves and positioning in ways that it's like a chess game, as is the Ukraine with Putin now. Not to talk too much about politics, of course, we will if you ask us direct questions, but and I will be talking, I'll be showing my few charts, which I'll show you are the United States, as we're really on the threshold of the Pluto return, which we've been experiencing for years now. But that is when the country is making revolutionary decisions about how they will govern. And is it going to be an overnight process? No, but it is something that will probably be a dramatic year. So to more timing, Jupiter goes into Aries in May. But before I get to May, I have to mention the first eclipse. So the first eclipse happens April 30th. And what's significant about all the eclipses this year is they're in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. Every year, the eclipses move into different sign relationships, as do the karmic nodes. So the focus this year is a lot on when the eclipses come in, is a lot, again, emphasizing money and what we value, because Taurus is, this is mine, these are my stuff, this is what I'm investing in, this is my home, my real estate, et cetera, my jewelry. And Scorpio is about what is the bigger investment picture. And so as the United States continues to talk about, where is it spending money and for whom, this is also indicative of the shift of who gets the bigger pieces of the pie. Is it the people, or is it the corporate machine, which Citizens United made citizens? So that April 30th eclipse, what happens the day before is Pluto goes retrograde. And the outer planets retrograde, they're like 6-month cycles. So we look at these shorter cycles, a lot of the personal planets, as this might affect you personally. But the longer, slower moving planets really shift us into different ways of seeing. So when Pluto goes retrograde, when Pluto appears to stand still in the sky, usually something is revealed. It may not be revealed that day, but within weeks or whatever, we start to see things that have been kept to a place where we're not supposed to see it. So retrograde, there's that sense of revelation, and eclipses are always about revelation. So when a big planetary energy is retrograde or going direct around the time of an eclipse, it's a big eclipse, because something is going to be revealed, made apparent. It can shake us up, it can make us double take, but it is the piece, I think, in the early spring that indicates where the buoyancy may come in once Jupiter enters Aries, and it's this kind of gangbusters energy. The other thing I want to mention about April, well, the other thing to mention about April is that the planet Jupiter, which I said makes everything seem bigger, Jupiter makes a conjunction to Neptune, also in Pisces, and Venus is in Pisces. So this energetically can feel like this sense of it's time to invest, it's time to play, it's time to get rid of all the protocol. It could be some good information comes in about health or ways that people might be sharing or connecting in a healing capacity, but it's also Neptunian, and things that are Neptunian, yes, when it's at its best, it's the highest octave of love. It's how we're all connected in this beautiful universal unconsciousness. And when we feel that like ultimate sense of real connection that can make you weep with music or with a wonderful meditation or something where you just feel all the love in the world. It can also be hypnotic. It's like, believe this, look at this, isn't this wonderful? So if you're feeling this great sense of optimism in April, I'm not saying you shouldn't fall in love with love, but just make sure you're good and grounded. Just make sure you've got the parachute if you're jumping out of the plane, because it's just so, it can feel so wonderful. It can be a deception as well. And well, there's two other pieces to mention, but which I know we have questions about climate change, so I won't touch on that now. But the other thing is that this whole year is colored by the theme of really integrating and coming to terms with a Saturn-Uranus square that we have gone through in 2021. The last time in 2021 that it's exact is Christmas Eve in the wee hours around 2 a.m. Now, what does that mean, Pamela? Oh, and I should finish. And then we don't really see the exact configuration again until we get to, what is it? It's September 30th, 2022. So what this means, what it is that we have to come to terms with, and as we may be feeling so many things are frustrating right now, is that Uranus wants change. It wants revolution. It wants the new. It wants something that hasn't been here before. And Saturn wants to keep it in a box. Oh, wow, you got a new dog, you got a new kitten, let's keep it in a crate. You can't keep it in a crate forever. So we're feeling that friction of things like, and now I'll share my screen. The United States is ready for change. It's ready for change and it wants it. But the question becomes, okay, so this is the United States in 1776, when the framers came up with, we're going to do the July 4th, we are independent, and Declaration of Independence. But this chart, they didn't know that the planet Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto was in the sky, because if they did, they may not have chosen this horoscope. What happened shortly after was the planet Uranus was discovered, And this is the United States with, if you can see my cursor, Uranus is right here, and this point here, this is the horizon. Everything here was below the sky. We didn't see it. It was underneath the sky, and this is everything above the sky. So Uranus was coming over the 7th house descendant, which means other people, other countries in the case of a country. So there's always this kind of wild card energy for the United States with its relationships with other countries. Franklin and friends, the Rosicrucian guys, and were concentrating on this. Oh, we're going to have great relationships with other countries. The sun, the Jupiter, they're going to love us. We're going to be really good with being like financially solvent. And with Mars, we'll know who our enemies are. Well, we also have Pluto in the 2nd house of the money of the country. So here's the shadow of what's become, one could argue, a plutocracy in the United States, where a small percentage of people have all the money. So the point about this chart is the Saturn-Uranus configuration I mentioned just now. And Saturn has been moving through the United States house of money. And the planet Uranus is in the 5th house, which is our love affair with our mythology of this country, but also what's the new mythology? What's coming up now? What's the risk that we're willing to take for our children? Because the 5th house is also children. It's creative ideas. And so as Pluto over here moves closer to that return point early next year, it's not as though on that day we're suddenly going to feel and know what the revolution is or how we're going to shapeshift. But this is all a piece of, oh, and the other planet that was undiscovered is Neptune, which Neptune is the highest point planet in the United States chart. It's in the 9th house of philosophy, higher education, religion, international travel, relationships like that. But Neptune means a lot of things symbolically. And one of the things it means is also it's the spectrum of the victim to the savior. So one of the things that's within that is how we relate to people who don't have as much, and how the United States relates to its own history of subjugating and victimizing people. And so the whole critical race theory discussion and the United States relationship with slavery, these are all things that as we make the Pluto return, I believe the United States really is at a reckoning, and it's time to come to terms with. Whether they will or not, that's where I put my Jupiterian hope and visioning. And because I believe that the United States can become a more compassionate country, but kind of only if we are willing to change the mythology that isn't about really looking at our shadow, our history, and our foundation. So I think it's time to open it up to questions.
Yes, well, thank you, Pam.
I turned off my screen, right? Okay, good. Thank you.
All right, so I'll start off with Beverly. Is Beverly still here? Yes, she is. And her question was, how long do you think this chaos that seems to be affecting everything is going to last. Was that an eye roll, Jenni? You just roll your eyes. You have to-
Okay. Well, I'll go first. I think part of what I just spoke about is the chaos. I mean, I imagine the chaos is going to continue until we're done with the Saturn-Uranus square, which will be the end of 2022. And part of that is because once Saturn moves on, Uranus is free to create, construct differently. And it also could be symbolic of the real shift. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention is the real shift of what Colin mentioned, I think, about all the men who put together these formulations or whatever, because we begin with Venus retrograde, but 2022 ends with Mars retrograde in the sign of Gemini, and Venus is the goddess of love and Mars is the god of war. But in the sign of Gemini, I think it could also indicate conversation, shifts in communication, dealing with the miasma that's caused by disinformation. And so it's interesting to me as we're in this whole gender conversation with the shift that's happened as soon as we entered the second millennium and left the year, the millennium one of the male, of the phallus, of the skyscrapers. And now we're in the two, which is the high priestess energy, which is about communication, coming to terms with equilibrium, balance. And the chaos ends. Well, actually, chaos is just part of how the universe operates. But Uranus is always somewhere. The inability to communicate or come to terms or break through barriers, I think starts to shift, as Jenni said, as we get into 2023. This year, it's time to really start to dissolve the sharp edges. I'll let somebody else speak now. Who wants to jump it? Jenni.
I think it's an odd question, because when does the chaos end? Is this chaos, or is this a shift to a different kind of understanding? If it's a shift to a different kind of understanding, then it could be 20 years. But it's never going to go back to the normal that we saw before. So whatever chaos is, it's revolution. It's producing something new. And if the question is, when will the new be normal? Years, across our lifetime. I think we're looking at chaos in an odd way. I don't think that's the question.
I go along with that. I'd just like to say, I don't know if you ever came across this, but there was a wonderful tweet somebody had written. When they closed the theatres in 1604 because of the plague, Shakespeare wrote King Lear. And then somebody else had answered, I don't need that kind of pressure. I mean, you can always find chaos, right? I mean, even in the best of times, there's always an element somewhere that isn't quite what you expected. I mean, obviously, we're living in times of enormous change. No, I mean, no question. and change must come for survival. So the way I see it is that there are these two parallel processes, well, not parallel and non-intersecting processes. On the one hand, what seems to me the disintegration, hopefully, of the plutocracy and the patriality, the corporate structures and big government. Pluto is helping with that. At the other hand, at the grassroots level, there's a fantastic amount of environmentally friendly and innovative technology. I mean, you know, I think it's a staggering what we could do, because the solutions are present. They are there. Clean energy could be implemented the world over within a decade. It could be done. So, you know, and maybe it will take chaos to bring those results. You know. Yeah.
Right.
So again, I also have no idea when the chaos will end, or if it ever does in some way. Yeah.
Right. And I wanted to just mention, when Jenni was talking about insurance and the climate, the other piece, of course, is insurance and firearms, because that's going to, I mean, that's been, anybody in healthcare will tell you that one of the reasons why it costs so much is because of so much firearm destruction that goes into hospitals that basically we taxpayers all pay for because nobody else is doing it. So as we see a shift, like parents actually being sued or considered responsible for what their children do with firearms, that goes back to insurance as well. So that'll be, I mean, it's, the question is, what is the revolutionary event or series of events that finally causes the change? And I know we all feel as though we've seen things that are like, oh, when are they going to get it? But in 2022, we may very well have experiences that bring that home.
Well, there is a question of what does climate change look like from an astrological perspective?
Well, I'm a great fan of Greta Thunberg. Is that how you say her name? She has a Sun Chiron conjunction, I believe. And to me, she's an example of someone who's turned a disability into a superpower. And it seems to me that she has been an enormous spur to global awareness. When you have, excuse my language, a buffoon like the current Prime Minister of England talking about climate change, as far as I can see, entirely due to this teenager from Scandinavia, you know, there's hope in that. I mean, we know that there's tremendous inertia. But, you know, the outer planets are effective. You know, I mean, Uranus in Taurus, you know. What does it look like, though? I mean, again, I think, you know, there's a wonderful film about the biggest little farm in the West or something like that. It's a fantastic documentary about a couple who took land where the largest factory farm of eggs in the USA had basically made the land barren, and they restored it. And it took 7 years, but it's now fertile and lush, and they have a huge diversity. I think it's a wonderful film. I must email you the link because I can't remember the title. But I think, again, dual processes, you know, regeneration and destruction side by side.
So just part of the chaos that's occurring. What would...
Oh, wait, Jenni has a thought.
I think the next generation is against climate, you know, the destruction of climate, and it's against firearms.
Mm.
Mhm.
And eventually their voice will be heard, because they're not going to put up with this shit much longer.
Yeah, nor should they. I've talked about this before, and just to go in depth on it, I can, if you're interested, I can lead you where on my website or other talks to hear about it, because I don't want to go too much into it. But the shorthand is when Pluto was demoted to dwarf planet status and Ceres was promoted, Ceres, an asteroid, the largest one in the belt. That was a huge symbolic message for astrologers that climate change would hopefully finally be taken seriously. Of course, that was, I think, 2001 or 2, and it's still it still should have happened by now. But Ceres, goddess of the harvest, is basically the mother-in-law of Pluto, who abducted and married the goddess of spring and made her one of the most powerful goddesses in the pantheon, the goddess of the underworld. But the symbolism of harvest and earth on this equilibrium with death and transformation, well, it makes perfect sense, because of course the earth knows totally about things die, regenerated, and come back again. Actually, there's a cartoon somebody sent me recently, because my husband's so into plants, where the plant kingdom says, oh, it's so great the way we have these humans take care of us. And then when they die, they also just regenerate us, and we just keep coming back. So the earth is just going to do fine without human beings. We have to figure out if we're invested in staying. But Ceres in May, early May, is in square aspect with Neptune and Jupiter. And as I said, Jupiter makes everything bigger. So Jupiter in Pisces with Neptune, god of the seas, in square, hard aspect with goddess of earth. And, I'm not going to say there's going to be some tsunami or earth event or something very watery and cataclysmic, but that configuration could certainly indicate something like that. So we pay attention to where Ceres is in dialogue with her brothers, because Pluto isn't only her son-in-law, he's also her brother, but mythology is very muddy that way, but they all represent different pieces of the psyche, which is all in each one of us brains. So it is kind of a messy, incestuous pool up there in our consciousness or unconsciousness. Okay, Kathy, next question. Sorry.
Well, there's a question. Are we doomed in our desire to maintain some form of democracy here, or will it continue to erode?
Big question.
Well, as the Yank, I'll just say that it would be the worst thing in the world for the United States to decide it wanted a different governmental structure. The mystery is there's just so much money in how it's all structured. How does that change? But that's the magic of chaos.
So I'm sure everyone's heard the Churchill's phrase about democracy. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. I mean, right. Yes.
Democracy. The United States is really a republic, and we have this structure, which it's not a parliament. It's and it's showing itself to self-destruct. It's not really functioning the way it was intended.
Do you,
So it can be a democracy, but it can change
Uh,
how it does that.
Pam and Jenny, I have a question for you. So we know that, discovery of Uranus, planet of revolution, discovery of Neptune, planet of illusion, discovery of Pluto, planet of regeneration. All these huge discoveries were reflected in social change and events that happened here on the Earth. Now, collectively, we have a burgeoning awareness of celestial bodies. So, we have the trans-Plutonian, up Eris, Sedna.
Thick and fast.
Thick and fast, thick and fast. Do you see that reflected in what's going on in the world today in some way?
Well, definitely Eris.
Well, Eris, yes, me too, for example.
Eris was the goddess of disruption.
Yeah.
And Sedna is the goddess of regeneration, food. She's harvest goddess of the Inuit, of the people who live in very cold places. And so she was discovered again in tandem with a lot of this climate awareness as the polar caps are melting. So, but there are so many heavenly bodies which are being discovered now. And I think that complements the multitudinous decisions that we have to make.
Yeah, I think so too. For me, it seems like the overflow of information. And, there's really something for everybody. There was a time when whole cultures, whole nations, whole continents believed one thing. That's certainly not the case now. It's, we're very expanded in the range of what we think, believe, and want.
But also distracted. It's
sure, yeah, exactly. My question really is, how do we cope with these new discoveries that keep coming at us? The whole understanding of the solar system is completely exploding, really.
I think it's back to what Jenni said on the onset of this discussion. It's, what do we really value as a human race? And the other thing that we've mentioned before, and certainly worth mentioning now, is that as Bezos and these guys keep racing up to space, we're invading neighborhoods that were kind of looking at us and saying, okay, let's see what the human beings do. So as it's not impossible that in our lifetimes, actually, I think it's more possible than impossible, that extraterrestrial contact will be made. And then the human race suddenly may have this watershed moment that they're one race. Again, I'm an optimist.
Yeah, what I think is democracy is not a USA question. It's a worldwide question. It's a human race question. So asking if America is going to become more democratic is part of a bigger question.
Right, because right now it's not. I mean, especially with gerrymandering and a gazillion voter infringement, that's probably the biggest problem right now in the States. But
that brings up a good question. What will the midterm elections look like?
Let's all pray. Let's all pray.
All right.
Scary.
No. Well, the election day in the United States has been, as what colleagues, I can't say the word on the recording, but it's been such a so many terrible configurations on election day have happened in the United States too many times in this millennium. And I do believe that's another indication of the chaos and need for change and revolution. And I mean, I think this one, I have to double check, but what is it that I'll look, well, because anything can happen essentially. And I think the thing that is guaranteed on November, what is it this year? It's, 2022. So it'll be, oh God, yeah. So people are not going to
November 8th.
think it's, yeah, I don't think people are not going to think it's legit. There's going to be a lot of confusion. It's right, it's a lunar eclipse. I knew it was something big. It's the lunar eclipse. So it's the lunar eclipse. So, oh, and the thing to mention about this eclipse cycle in 2022 is it mirrors back to the eclipse cycles of 2004. So for all of us personally, we can think about what was going on at that point in time during the eclipses, because there's usually theme echoes. So the November 8th lunar eclipse is, it's in Taurus, and Joe Biden has the moon in Taurus. And yeah, he's a Scorpio. So it's not on his moon because he's late degree, but the president of a country, or whatever, whoever the leader is, indicates like what's going on with the country. So it's another indication of the extremes. The full moons or the eclipses that have happened. Joe Biden is our second in a row full moon president. The last one was as well, and he was born on an eclipse, President Trump. And I think of that sun-moon opposition as being so indicative of the extreme polarity in the country. So that's going on during election day, and it's overall, it ends well, but it's going to cause, I don't think people are going to be like, oh, everything's reconciled now. And it'll be kind of an extreme day.
Well, we are running out of time. And I don't know if anyone else has any other questions that they'd quickly like to inquire about. Just unmute yourself and we can.
Yeah, I had one for Pamela. Hey, Pam, when you were talking about sharing, you talked about corporations sharing, would they be willing to do it? But isn't the larger question, and will the governments, will the countries be willing to share?
Well, I guess that depends on who you think rules a country. But yeah, money and governments are so in bed with one another, depending on the country. And back to, as Jenni said, with the revolution, it's what is it we value and care about. So, when wealthy countries basically focus and just care about their own, not even just talking about what's going on with the pandemic, but with water, with infrastructure, with I mean, historically, a country like the United States and other countries just give poor countries arms and show them how to create armies. I mean, water, infrastructure, farming, homes. Anyway.
Well, water's huge. When you said water, I thought, wow, I haven't been thinking about water, but it's
Yeah.
everything.
It's everything. Our blue planet, it's everything. It's back to, what was that David Bowie movie, The Man Who Fell to Earth?
Yeah.
I mean, he came looking for water.
Well, I want to thank Jenni and Colin and Pam for their wisdom and their insight. And thank you all for showing up this evening. I'm going to stop the recording and wish you all a good evening.